I'd like to introduce a lady that I first met in Darwin, Australia. In fact, it was early this year, March, and she really impressed me with her overall understanding of the industry, tourism industry. And the tourism industry is capable of great good and it's capable of great harm. It has inflicted some harm around the world, and we're all familiar with that. And this lady impressed me with her understanding of how all that has occurred and how it is still occurring, and also why we need Indigenous type values, or why we need universal values and principles to deal with these issues. And so I made a commitment that somehow I would find a way to speak on the same platform with her, and here we are today together. I would like to introduce from Conscious Travel, Anna Pollock. Anna.
Well, good morning again. It's just so exciting to be here. It's exciting because right now I think we're living at the most amazing, exciting, and scary time in history. And history is being made every day because there's the pace and scope and depth of change that's taking place is quite phenomenal. And every one of us that happen to be born at this particular time are really shaping the future, in fact determining, I would argue, the future of humanity. So the work we're doing today is extremely important in that context. What I want to talk about is why Indigenous travel matters now. And you'll notice I use the word travel, and you'll see later why I've chosen travel rather than tourism. So I'm going to talk about this is your time, or this is our time, and Ben is going to talk about Indigenous values that can make such a major contribution to mainstream tourism, to ensuring that mainstream tourism doesn't harm the earth, doesn't harm Mother Earth, can be sustainable. Because it's my opinion that the way it's being conducted in many parts of the world right now in its mass industrial form is actually non-sustainable. It just cannot go on that way. We have to find another way of doing tourism that leaves more benefit than harm. So you're going to have a role going forward. So very quickly I'm going to cover these 5 topics right now. First of all, the state we're in. In Darwin I spoke at greater length about the problems affecting us. I think every one of you in this room are already very aware of that, and you don't need 20 minutes of a litany of the challenges facing humanity at this point in time. But I'll just briefly cover some of those. Ben called it the imperative. Why, again, the Indigenous people of this world must not be shy, but must step forward and say there is a potential for a better way if we work together. Then I'd like to go a bit deeper and explore why we're in the state we're in, if you see what I mean. What thinking, what mindsets, what perception got us into this fix? And who's going to fix it? Who's going to help change it? And introduce just a little bit of the mountains of research that I've uncovered on how the customer, the guest, the visitor, the tourist, however you like to describe them, is also changing. And what I think in the takeaway are the 2 things I would like you to focus on as being the keys to our success in this endeavor. So again, I spend an awful lot of my time looking outside of tourism at the changes and issues and challenges that are affecting our economy and explaining what that might mean for destinations and for tourism operations. And it can be quite depressing in a way, because the sheer number of issues and mega forces that are now converging in an unknown way is quite enormous. And I'm not going to talk to every one of those, or we'll be here for weeks. And I think you're aware of most of them, but it is a significant situation that we find ourselves in right now. And what that means is we're in a period of enormous turbulence and change and uncertainty. And as I said at the beginning, the speed with which right now people are waking up to these issues and becoming conscious of them is quite remarkable. And as an example of that, I was in Ecuador at a meeting convened by the United Nations World Tourism Organization and the Organization of American States. So we had all of the great and the good at the top of the tourism tree, if you like, there. And I've been quite critical of the UNWTO at times, simply because they're always emphasizing the positive of tourism, always emphasizing its growth potential, the pace of growth, its resilience, the way it creates jobs, the way it provides income to poor countries, etc., etc. And to my great surprise and gratification, Taleb Rifai, who also spoke here, stood up and said, we are an enormous industry growing at a phenomenal pace, and it's time that we now recognize that tourism has a dark side to it, as well as a positive side. And I thought that took enormous courage to do that, and it's timely and it was appropriate, but it showed to me just the sheer speed with which things are changing. The second evidence was that the theme of that conference, which was chosen by Ecuador to lead all of the discussions about ethics and then all about development of tourism in one of the fastest growing tourism regions in the world, Latin America, the theme was in Spanish, Turismo Consciente, which is conscious tourism or conscious travel. Now, very few people really understand what that might mean. I think it's something we're creating together here. But again, to have that as the underlying theme of the conference in 2012 was another dream come true. Now, the traditional message from the tourism establishment, as it were, is this is the state we're in. We're in this rapidly growing business, this industry called tourism, that's grown from a few million people when I was born in 1949, right the way through to just hitting the 1 billion international visitors traveling across this planet. For the domestic tourism, that's probably 5, 6, 7 times bigger than that. That's an awful lot of feet moving around, wouldn't you agree? And we've gone from, let's say, a couple of million to 1 billion in about 62 years. But what's scary is that they're projecting we're going to grow by another 400 million in just another 8 years. And now they're projecting that we'll hit 1.8 billion. Now just think of the impact of that kind of growth. And it begs the question, can we withstand it? Are we prepared for it? What impact will it have? And is it desirable? Is it about the number of people coming to our destinations? Or is it really about the value that that generates, the benefit to the host communities that occurs? How much of that money stays with the people who act as the host? And these are the questions that I think need to be discussed right now. Now, I came across this image on the internet, and I obviously think it's a wonderful Photoshop creation. But they do say that a picture says 1,000 words. And I think the reason that this is a very powerful image is that if you imagine that the capsule contains tourists, visitors, travelers, eager to see the view, it's hanging rather precariously attached to the rock by a piece of human engineering. But most importantly, this capsule is being suspended in midair by a living organism, a tree. And I think that this is our reality right now. Metaphorically speaking, if you go back to the previous slide, that is what I call a tourism tsunami. Imagine that this wasn't quite so elevated above sea level. I'm mixing my metaphors, I admit. But to imagine that there was some kind of a tsunami or gale force winds or an earthquake to affect that rock face, will the tourism capsule hold out? Because the faster we grow and the bigger we grow, the less resilient we become. And these are the questions that I was suggesting that the UNWTO need to be talking about openly and publicly. And the other side of that is that they need to be talking about how they can solve some of the problems we're in and not just constantly be asking for more money and more attention. Now, this is another graph, and this is taught in all tourism schools around the world. I don't think there's an institution that teaches tourism management that doesn't have this graph in it. And it came from a Dr. Butler out of the University of Waterloo in Canada, and it was used to describe how tourism destinations rise and decline. So one of the examples that Dr. Butler used was Niagara in Canada, Niagara Falls. Another possible example is Venice, where a place is discovered, and it's the hot new product, it's the hot new destination, and then developers come in, build a hotel, restaurants start to pop up, then we have guided tours, and the whole thing goes through a rapid stage of development. This is exactly where most tourism in South America is right now, in my opinion. The challenge is that eventually there are some fundamental problems with the model that we've been using. The industrial model, it's the same as the economic model that underpins everything in the Western economy. And that is that over time, it ends up producing diminishing returns for virtually everybody in the system. Diminishing returns in terms of the profit margin for the participants tend to go down over time. So we have a situation right now where Thomas Cook is running on a 1% margin. So if you're operating on those kind of thin margins, the only way that you can continue to produce a return to your shareholders is to get bigger. So you either get bigger or you do that in many cases. The quickest way to do that, and most CEOs are in a hurry because they've got quarterly returns to meet, is through mergers and acquisitions. So we see those companies getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We see wealth concentrated in fewer hands. And the reason we're so prone to this diminishing returns in tourism is that we are selling something that is very perishable. It's an experience that takes place at a point in time. So when I'm staying at the hotel down the road tonight, that is associated with tonight. And if that hotel room had not been sold last night, it couldn't have been sold again to anyone else. So whenever anything goes wrong in tourism, and we're so prone to external factors hitting us, like currency exchange rates, a tsunami, a volcano erupting, the political unrest in a particular area, could be anything. But there are all of these pressures on us that cause demand to do this. Now this graph that I showed you back here looks nice and smooth, doesn't it? But it isn't like that at all, is it? Think of your own small community. Does demand do that every year? It does this. And that's the most harmful thing. Because every time it does that, what do we do? What is our strategic response to a drop in demand? You business people. I don't believe you'll sit there and look at your fingers and read your notebooks. What do? You slash costs, right? And what's the impact of slashing costs? You lay people off. What's the impact of that on the guest experience?
Less quality of service.
Pardon?
Less quality of service.
Less quality of service. But what else do most people in tourism do? I don't believe it.
Offers.
You drop your price. Of course. I mean, every destination right now, doesn't matter how beautiful it is having a seat sale. Yes, Leo?
I think we have to innovate, not to drop prices. just look to other opportunities.
Yes.
And be open to that and listen to what really is emerging and try to create a really unique product with the experience we have talked about the last few days. And not drop the price. This is not a way to develop a business.
No, it isn't. Thank you. You're completely right. It isn't a way, but unfortunately this is the way tourism is done. All right? And it's done partly for, and I'd like to just now get into the, before I do get into the deeper reasons, I'll just very quickly point out that if you're not aware of it, we've got some major problems that we've generated as a result of our having to grow in volume. Congestion, the picture up there on the top left is, you can probably barely make it out, but it looks like a bunch of ants going up a snow-clad hillside. It's actually climbers who are going to ascend Mount Everest. It's getting pretty congested up there in Nepal. This picture down here, the one below that, you've all seen those beautiful pictures in the travel magazines of Far and National Geographic of the Maldives. Well, one of the islands in the Maldives has been designated for the exclusive purpose of taking all the trash from the visitors that go to the other beautiful islands of the Maldives. These visitors never see the trash island. It's a trash mountain now, and it's now slipping into the ocean. Because where do the Maldives take our trash? You know, it's all the stuff that we have in our bags and smuggle through security or try to. You know, it's our toiletries, our combs, our stuff that we leave. And in conferences, half the time, it's all the giveaways that we've picked up and we leave behind, right? Where does it end up? In a mountain. We're starting to see in some major destinations, Venice is one, Bali is another one, a backlash from residents. They're really, young people in Bali are now really, excuse my language, pissed off. Because they're saying, you've sold our inheritance, you're bastardizing our culture, and now you've sold up most of our agricultural land for spas and resorts. So they're actually putting signs up right in the paddy fields saying Bali is not for sale. We've got a problem with our cultural heritage. There's a gentleman here from Tibet, so forgive me if my information is correct. I'd like you to put me right. But this came out of an article from the China Daily News, of all places, saying that there are several thousand monasteries in Tibet. There are 10 million tourists visiting, and they're projecting 15 million in a few years. But most of the monasteries are falling into a state of physical disrepair. So, why are we in this state? Now, I like to go deep beneath the surface to look at why we're in it. And the point I'm making is that we're in it because of the way we think. And we think a certain way ever since the Industrial Revolution or the Scientific Revolution or the Age of Enlightenment. We think in a certain way. And we develop systems and processes and ways of doing things. Now, tourism was born, really, after the last two wars. As I say, I was born in 1949. I'm a classic baby boomer. The war's over, let's make babies, you know. And I'm a result, and so that's right. But what happened then was that they started to, travel industry started, and we started with planes that got bigger and bigger. But how were we going to get organized as a, quote, industry? And we borrowed our operating model from manufacturing. And this was the age of mass transportation, the age of the automobile, mass media, mass entertainment, mass everything. And that we're right at the sort of tail end of that right now. And that was based on the notion of having a product that was put together on an assembly line through specializing and having hierarchies of organization. Again, I'm not going to go into this in depth, but I just want you to follow the story. It meant that you could make more money if you had economies of scale. What that means if you got bigger and controlled more of the production processes. But it also meant that you had to standardize, you had to streamline, you had to write scripts for people to say when they answered the phone. So what started out like this, looking very romantic, is actually like this. This is my travel experience in crowded UK. It may not be your travel experience, but it certainly is mine. In the United States, most airports look more like Greyhound bus stations. And you have to climb over people sleeping on the floor, or eating on the floor, which is even more disturbing because all of the food now is fast food, franchised out. So even underneath all that, the operating model that we borrowed from manufacturing is a way of thinking. And this is where I want you to really think about today, to come away starting to look at how you think, how you've been trained to think. And one of the things that in our current mindset is we label everything. And we do it in tourism, because now we've got every conceivable kind of tourism under the sun. We've got agri-tourism, we've got culinary tourism, we've got, give me some examples quickly, other labels of tourism, we put things in boxes.
Community-based tourism.
Community-based, thank you. We've got, what else have we got? Voluntourism, fantastic. Experiential tourism.
Ecotourism.
Ecotourism, cultural tourism, responsible tourism. Tourism for left-handed Scrabble players, tourism, right? So we put it in a box, and when we put it in a box, we separate it. We take our customers and we give them a label. You actually will sit in marketing meetings and they'll talk about, we're aiming at a certain demographic. Well, are you a demographic, Alvar? No, you're a human being with a wife from Russia, okay? And probably children, but you're a human being with feelings and heart. You're not a demographic. But we do that with this industrial way of thinking. And if you want evidence of that, because this picture I use, it came from a guy that's a really good thinker, to talk about the way we think in our industrial world. And then I just got out of the lift in Vancouver, as it happened, where I was speaking. I'd just been using this image. I got out of the lift in the hotel, and that was the corridor. You see where I'm getting at? How we've done tourism? The only way we could have grown to 1 billion is to treat our customers as objects on an assembly line. Do you follow me? And then we come up with language like this, which I just detest. I suppose I'm sort of, I love language. I'm not a poet, but, what kind of way of thinking could come up with a language to say we have to monetize something, we have to productize it, then we have to standardize it, homogenize it. And what we're doing in tourism is as a result of that thinking, we've turned the very essence of travel, which is the mystery of going, and the mystery and magic of going to a different place, and we've turned it into a product, and we've turned that product into a commodity. And is it surprising then that most businesses in tourism are struggling? They are not making a decent return, because 9 times out of 10 we're giving it away for free, or pretty close to. So who's going to fix this problem? Do you think it's the United Nations? Do you think it's the White House or big government? Do you think it's going to be coming from major international meetings where heads of state ride in their limousines with all of their bureaucrats and protectors around them, having another meeting, another talk fest? Is that going to fix it? No. Where is change actually occurring? And this is the reason to be optimistic. It's occurring in every community we live in. It's occurring because people like you are standing up, waking up, and taking responsibility for your own future. All the change that's happening is happening at the grassroots level. And it was Margaret Mead who said, never doubt that a small group of people can change the world, because when you get right down to it, all change starts with you, an individual, or you as a group working together. But the other thing that will really make change happen is if we don't try to solve the current problems, fix the current problems with the same way of thinking that got us into the problem in the first place. And this is a famous quote from Albert Einstein, who did an awful lot more than be a physicist. He was a very, very wise man, but he said you cannot solve a problem with the same thinking. So I'm saying in tourism, we've got to rethink. We've got to come up with a new way of looking at it if we're going to succeed. And the first thing we have to do is say that tourism is not an industry, it's a system, a dynamic, living, organic, messy, fuzzy system made up of people. People, hosts, people as guests, people who live in the community that make that interaction possible. And they live in a very distinct community called a place. And that place is embedded on Mother Earth, that supplies the support system. And if we're going to really make a difference, we're going to have to see that system in a different way, not as a piece of a value chain made up of products and an assembly line, but in that way that I've described it. And we've got to now start to look at the fundamental values and beliefs that we hold in the Western system that's dominated and ask if they're really working. And that's the connection with the Indigenous. Because what I'm going to let Ben show you shortly is there is another way, as you well know, of seeing the world. And it's time that we started to blend these two. It's not about, but you have to go forward into the future with something that balances, but takes the wisdom and knowledge of Indigenous people. And when our values and beliefs change in that system, which is mostly human, then everything else changes. I'm going to skip through this slide, but I've done a lot of work on really examining what are those values and beliefs that cause us to behave a certain way. And we'll, if there's time, we'll come back to that later, because I don't want to talk for too long. But the good news is that we're all human. And I can guarantee that over a period of time, your way of looking at the world, particularly those of you who come living in the Western economies, who are perhaps a little bit more detached from an Indigenous perspective, your values and beliefs are shifting. But there is a huge amount of research that I've been looking at as to just what's happening out there. There is the emergence of what is called the conscious consumer. Now, it's been going along for about since the 70s, some would even say in the 60s, but it really has accelerated in the last 10 years. The global recession was probably the best thing that could have happened to us on this planet. It kind of like stalled everything, and it's caused people to seriously rethink. So on the right, on the picture, the boxes on the right hand are just some of the numerous studies that I ended up looking at a year or so ago, describing what impact the recession had had on the consumer. And we're now in a situation where just under 50% of consumers worldwide would actually prefer to buy from companies that are socially and environmentally responsible. And that percentage varies enormously from one region to another. Interestingly, in Australia, it's about the lowest. They're having a boom right now. There's no Australians that I can offend, I hope. But unfortunately, the Australians are doing pretty well, and only 31% of them seem to care about environmental and social issues. I'm not wanting to cast too many aspersions. They're just having, they're at a certain stage in their development. But if you get to Latin America, for example, it's 75%, a huge variation. The other thing that's happening is business is completely rethinking itself. And I'm talking about big business. You know, little businesses in tourism tend to look up to the big boys. And if they say that profit is the primary reason for getting up and going to work, and it's shareholder return, and it's high returns every quarter, that's what the tourism industry tends to copy. But interestingly, all the major big businesses and the major business schools and the major gurus in business are now questioning all that. We have Michael Porter saying we have to rethink capitalism. We have a group of extremely successful companies that include Google, Patagonia, Southwest Airlines, Whole Foods, all calling themselves conscious capitalists because they're saying that we have to do our businesses differently. We have to look at the benefit we generate. So business is over. Business as usual is over. Everyone outside is rethinking, and what I'm saying is we have to do that in tourism. So my question is, there has to be a better way, and the better way will come from thinking differently, and who best, right now, to being a positive influence and helping this huge juggernaut called tourism slow down and start to think about quality and not quantity for the Indigenous tourism community. And on that, with that intro, Ben, I'd really like you to share your thoughts about the values that can make the difference. Thank you.